Our next speaker is the co-founder and co-CEO of Notpla. It sounds better when he says it in French. A London-based sustainable packaging company was the winner of the 2022 Earthshot Prize for the most ingenious solution for repairing and regenerating our planet. Please welcome Pierre Paslier.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm Pierre, one of the co-founders of Notpla. We are a London startup, and we develop alternatives to single-use plastics using seaweed and plants. So we're going to talk a little bit about plastic. We're so used to these kind of items; they are part of our daily life. But actually, they were not invented that long ago. A little bit of history. This gentleman, Alexander Parks, actually came up with plastic in Hackney Wick in East London, if you can believe that. And it's quite funny that we are also located in Hackney Wick, so about like 2 blocks away from where we are, there's a plaque that says first plastic in the world, and that was just kind of like a little bit more than 100 years ago. So this material has become ubiquitous. We find it in every supermarket. We use it every day in multiple different kind of like sorts of plastic, and that's because it's extremely performant. But on the flip side, it's also indestructible. And so the problem, as many of you are aware, is that by using it for applications that are kind of like quickly thrown away, lost into the environment, we're creating mountains and mountains of this material that has no chance of breaking down in the environment. And we're just at the beginning of understanding the kind of implications that this is having on us and on this planet. So for example, microplastics have the potential of really messing with some of the microorganisms. This, for example, plankton is sequestering for humanity about 30% of our carbon emissions without us having to build any new fancy technologies, just doing it for free every year by eating nutrients, and those nutrients are falling to the bottom of the ocean. But because they are eating more and more microplastics, that's now floating at the surface, that's not falling down the bottom of the ocean anymore. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of the kind of like natural systems that we are messing with when we are putting this indestructible material out there. I had a role to play in this. I started my career as a packaging engineer. I was working for L'Oreal, the cosmetic company, and making lots of shampoo bottles and cream jars by the like tens of millions. But I somehow realized that like I really wasn't feeling quite right about working towards kind of like more of the same problem. I wanted to be part of the solution. I met my co-founder Rodrigo, who was also kind of like working with plastic for making installations and temporary architecture. And we met together during a master's here in London at Imperial College, where we started a little project that was a little bit kind of like unusual. We wanted to create something that would feel more like a fruit, like creating packaging that you could feel comes from like picking something from a tree rather than like out of a production line. So we came up with this. So this is what we call Oho. This one has some kind of like orange juice inside. And it's a little kind of like sachet that contains liquids. And the fun thing about it is that it's actually edible packaging, so cheers. And if you can eat it, you know that nature can eat it. So we were really inspired by this idea of using membranes that are found in nature. I'm just going to finish to eat it. No waste. And so nature are a very efficient use of materials. You found them in kind of like all types of kind of like scales, from our human cells to kind of like fruits, eggs. And actually like the base technology that we started using was not something we invented. It was used for making fake caviar. If you've ever had those little kind of like fake kind of like fish eggs, they're actually made from seaweed. They are kind of like a very cheap kind of like food technology that was invented by Unilever in the 1930s. And when we learned about this and we were kind of like intrigued about how you could make tiny little droplets that contain liquid, we started reading about seaweed and found out how seaweed actually is quite an extraordinary set of organisms. It felt like it was just ticking all the boxes when it comes to kind of like a sustainable material for packaging. Some species of seaweed can grow extremely fast, up to 1 meter per day. They don't require fresh water or fertilizer. They actually sequester carbon by kind of like taking it from the ocean, reducing the acidity of the ocean, and they provide a real kind of like habitat for more fish to grow in the ocean, so it's truly regenerative. And as mentioned previously, like there are a lot of different seaweeds. So there's more than 12,000 species. Some of them have more genetic difference than between a mushroom and a human. We call it seaweed, but it's actually a whole other world of kind of like organisms. And so we were quite excited about kind of like using those types of seaweed to be able to create quite a range of different packaging solutions. And we really thought that if it was ticking all the boxes, someone had to bring it to the packaging well. So at Notpla, what we do is that we learn how to use some of these different extracts to be able to create alternatives to single-use plastics. And I've kept the kind of like the best like property last. Because it's been in the environment for more than like 100 million years, seaweed is naturally biodegradable. So it doesn't require any human intervention. It doesn't require separate kind of like picking. When inevitably some of our waste will end up in nature, we know that we are not introducing something that's going to create forever trash, which is unfortunately not the case of the first generation of bioplastics that have been kind of like in the market for the last 10 years. PLA and other kind of like bioplastics are pretending to do the whole job, but actually they require separate sorting and industrial conditions to be able to break down. So it's been an exciting year for us. We won the Earthshot Prize, spent quite a bit of time with the prince, but actually it started like just in our kitchen with Rodrigo. At that point, as I was mentioning, it was more of like an exploration. We would invite kind of like friends over for dinner and repackage everything in bubbles. Some things work, some others not so much. But when we went to kind of like try to find some funding, it was actually quite hard. We didn't manage to get kind of like investors. It was quite a weird new category. So eventually we did an equity crowdfunding campaign with Crowdcube. So that was a really exciting way of going direct to people. And in just 3 days, we raised about £850,000. And we have 900 investors from all around the world who are kind of like our ambassadors. That allowed us to develop like the machinery. So we started to develop kind of like different types of machines for making the OHO product, which found a specific set of applications. We've been kind of like really interested in how we can use this type of fruit-like containers for marathons and running events. So as you can imagine, when you see kind of like those races, there's piles and piles of plastic that is used, either the cups or the bottles. So super exciting to have something that like people can just grab. This is the London Marathon, where we're able to have kind of like a station that was completely plastic-free. And today we're working with large groups like Decathlon to help them eliminate the use of kind of like sachets for energy gels and these types of products. You can fill it with different things. So for example, you can use it with olive oil for drizzling very precisely onto your salad and having kind of like no plastic waste behind. But at some point, we realized that there were lots of other applications for this technology. One of the projects that we were working on was with Just Eat, and they were really sharing with us that one of their big problems is the takeaway containers. Typically, they require plastic. We think, when we don't think too long about it, that it's just cardboard, but actually cardboard cannot hold the grease and the moisture of the food. So you need to have something that provides this barrier. Typically it's plastic. So you have plastic, you have bioplastics, but as we've talked about, those require specific end of life that is kind of like risky if you're going to lose this to the environment. And unfortunately, there's quite a lot of kind of like other solutions that aren't much better than plastic. So you've probably heard about PFAS, these kind of like forever chemicals that unfortunately are used for this type of containers. And there's even kind of like some new hidden plastics that the industry has come up with to remarket what is happening. So unfortunately, those dispersion coatings or aqueous coatings, they're kind of like the worst of both worlds. It's directly applying microplastics on the surface of cardboard. But unfortunately, those microplastics are made from like polystyrene, polyacrylate. And when you think about it, it's basically kind of like taking microplastics directly in contact with your food and getting a chance of these microplastics to go straight into kind of like what you eat, but also at end of life, if you're going to recycle this cardboard, literally have that kind of like going into the environment. So not really a great solution. There's a clear need for innovation. No one wants to eat that. But like the reality is, like the more we use those coatings and then we recycle the cardboard, the more those coatings, those microplastics, they go into the wastewater, they go into our rivers, into the oceans already directly as microplastics. So thinking again, like how can we leverage our technology? We created a coating made from the seaweed that we were kind of like working with up until then to be able to provide this resistance to grease and moisture. And we've been working with lots of partners, including Just Eat, to kind of like take this out of the lab and really scale it up. And it's been a really exciting journey where actually we have found partnerships and we have found ways to retrofit our solution into existing plants. So we didn't have to kind of like build new factories. We were able to kind of like work with the ones that transform plastic today. So hopefully that's a little kind of like overview of how you go from the seaweed all the way to the boxes. So in this case, we're using mostly brown seaweed. We get the gelatinous part of the seaweed. It's kind of like a varnish. And then we apply it on this giant factory that is like based in Manchester that actually was used to apply the adhesive at the back of stamps. But the stamp business is kind of going down, so they're happy to kind of like find a new use. And then it's just going through the rest of kind of like the manufacturing supply chain and now being used in more than 9 countries in Europe, in stadiums, home delivered kind of like meals. And the great thing is that inevitably some of that packaging is going to get lost. If it ends up in nature, it never creates a long-lasting waste. So we're really trying to work with places where there is consumption on the go, where in a way plastic is the worst kind of like material. We're getting a little bit of help on the business development side from the prints, always helps. But what's really exciting is that legislation is really starting to change and tackling some of those more hidden plastics. So that's one incentive to kind of like get more companies looking at what we're doing. In particular, in the Netherlands, there's a new tax on those types of takeaway food containers that contain plastic. That is a real incentive for businesses to switch away as we decrease our costs. And in Europe, there is like now a clear definition of what is and isn't plastic, which is quite helpful. So basically, the definition goes like this. If a polymer is found abundantly in nature, that's a good first step. But the second step is that you should not chemically modify it into something else. So only if you have a natural material and you haven't chemically modified it, is it kind of like out of the plastic category. Everything else is plastic, and that way we're really making sure that we're not releasing in nature something that doesn't exist there. And so luckily for us, we've been kind of like able to really leverage this innovation in that space. And we have, for the first time, been validated externally by a government. In the Netherlands, they said no more self-regulation from the industry that always tries to greenwash its way out of this. So we're going to test ourselves who is plastic and who is not. And we're really happy to say that Notpla is currently the first and only solution in the Netherlands that has been validated as plastic-free. So that's quite kind of like good to set a bit the bar for like the industry to police itself a little bit more. In the pipeline, there's a few other exciting things that are popping up. We have flexible films that will allow us to do all sorts of different sachets. We can do some interesting things about seaweed. For example, we can make soluble sachets. You can imagine all sorts of applications where everything kind of like disappears by magic. And we are actually kind of like quite excited about replacing, for example, the soluble plastic that is used for the detergent pods. That is a material called PVOH. It's a soluble plastic, so it doesn't go away. It just kind of like disappears momentarily in water, but it stays around. And we're really working with kind of like the rest of the industry, once again, to not build new factories, but actually work with the existing players. We are kind of like now also kind of like conscious that we are creating a lot of this gelatinous part of the material from the seaweed. So we want it to be fully circular and not get all the fibrous part of the seaweed go to waste. So we actually created our own kind of like range of products that use our own waste. So this is a seaweed paper that is made from kind of like the fibers that come out of this extraction process that is now used by a range of kind of like companies around fashion and cosmetics for secondary packaging. And we're also pushing a little bit the limits of what's possible to do. So we are really keen to enter into kind of like more rigid applications where you can really mold products using some of those seaweed extracts. And so excitingly, for example, in the UK, there is the new ban on like plastic cutlery, which has opened a lot of kind of like doors for us to explore the use of these materials, now that plastic has been removed from the equation. So coming to you very soon, maybe next summer, ice cream scoops for kind of like not using any plastic. And the great thing is that now we're really starting to see this starting to have the scale and the kind of like moving the needle on plastic. So when a couple of years ago we were just testing at like pilot scale, this year we're on track to replace 5 million single-use plastics from entering the market. Our team is kind of like really kind of like delivering on all these fronts, and we are quite excited to accelerate still what we can do. So with the help of kind of like more financing, more legislation, we think that these solutions have a real chance of helping us to get rid of plastic and to make sure that like we can end up in a world where there is zero plastic in nature. And I'm hoping that like all of you will be big supporters of seaweed wherever you can help with that. So thank you very much for your attention, and the future is seaweed.